Hey, welcome back. It is time for Nancenotes podcast number 11. And today's topic is what I'm really excited about because we're going to talk about the Herculaneum Library. There's a huge story last week in the news, something that just absolutely got me so excited, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it or talking about it. I've probably talked to every single person I've come in contact with since the 4th when the big story was announced. So this is just really very, very exciting stuff. So before I get into it, I just want to say I absolutely love libraries. Very obviously, some people like looking at pictures of puppies and things like that in order to give them an emotional high or something. That doesn't do anything for me. I can look at pictures of puppies all day and not even be fazed. But show me a picture of a beautiful library, and that's going to touch my heart deeply. So I love libraries. I love old libraries. Just any place where books are, obviously, is a cool place to me. I've always enjoyed being around books. When I was a kid, I dreamed of owning a used bookstore, and all those sorts of things. So being around books is always a delight to me. I just come in the morning and I sit down in my library, and it's very soothing. So libraries, being around books is a great thing. But you also think about historical libraries, going back through time to some of the great libraries in history. Pretty much all the old ancient libraries, which were wonders of the world, right? Books were incredibly expensive back in the ancient worlds because you had to handwrite all of them. And so they are something that was you poured tons of resources into because it's not easy to get books. And so you've got these old ancient books that are insanely valuable even in the day that they are written. And you have absolute tragedies like the destruction of the library in Alexandria, those sorts of things, where all these manuscripts, all these great old works, these old copies of priceless documents were destroyed, never to be seen again. There's a lot of really sad stories in history about that sort of thing. But if you you look through history, you also have these great moments of discovering cool documents and finding a lost book for the first time and being able to look at that. How absolutely cool that is. Well, this week we had a phenomenal story about the beginning of a recovery effort, which could lead us to having who knows how many new books from the ancient world. Works that have not been seen in 2,000 years. That is absolutely thrilling to me. So, looking back at this story, let's start from the beginning. So most people are pretty familiar with the story of Pompeii and the story of Mount Vesuvius. I'm wearing my Floor is Lava Championship shirt today in honor of this podcast because it's exciting. So from Pompeii, Italy. So way back, about 2,000 years ago, circa 79. There's a little bit of dispute on the date, and that's changed over time. Some people say mid 80s, some people say 79. I think the current date is 79. That is the more accepted date at this point. But everybody knows the story in general. A volcano went off, burying the town of Pompeii. And it wasn't like just lava poured over the town. In fact, it was more the toxic ash that spread from the volcano all over the town. People were choked to death by the poisonous air, and they curled up and died. And then were covered in the ash and debris from the volcano, and by being buried, they were ultimately preserved, and the whole town was preserved, and then was rediscovered. Of course, it was mentioned a few times in manuscripts. You have a disaster like that, people are going to talk about it, but so there are references to it. But it was eventually rediscovered, and the excavation began in the 18th century, so mid 1700s. All right, so you have about almost 1700 years that this town has been buried. And if you're familiar with the story, you're probably also familiar with some of the amazing things that they found there. They found all of these holes, these cavities that had bones in them, where the bodies used to be, but the bodies had disintegrated down to dust. And so there's nothing in the cavity except space. And yet, this negative space, they allowed some of the people who were digging and excavating there, they poured plaster into these holes. and then excavated around the plaster and found, by making these casts, they found the shapes of the people who had died in the disaster. Absolutely amazing. And of course, there's lots of pictures of that. You can easily find them by looking around for just a few minutes. So, fascinating story. Most people are pretty familiar with that. And there's a second town, which is less well known than Pompeii, called Herculaneum. And Herculaneum was nearby, a little bit around the volcano. And Herculaneum was also destroyed by Mount Vesuvius. In fact, it was destroyed almost a little bit more directly by the flow of the volcano and by the molten lava, as well as like if I remember right, the basically intensely hot mud that's sliding down from the mountain here. And so the Herculaneum was just buried, and the people there would have died from the intense blast of heat, maybe some of the air as well, but they could have easily just been pretty quickly burned up. So both these cities completely covered, and they have been excavated partially. There's actually a ton of Pompeii and a ton of Herculaneum left that have not yet been excavated, and we have these ancient places that have so much insight into history, so much insight into the world, that we've really only just barely scratched the surface on. And yet, what was that, 300 years ago? So, kind of fascinating. But our story comes to a villa in Herculaneum, which was filled with these intense outflow of the volcano. And it poured into this villa. This villa had belonged to Julius Caesar's father-in-law, whose name is Lucius Calpurnius, I believe. His wife was named Calpurnia. If you've read Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, you know that. But anyway, so Lucius Calpurnius, his house, his villa, which, again, I'm not sure what year he died, but it had originally belonged to him, probably since this is sometime after that. It's passed down or something. I'm not sure who was the owner at the time of the disaster. But in any case, it was a huge villa with all of these rooms. And it contained a library. And not a little rink-a-dink library. This was a big, massively expensive library. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to hear the rest of the podcast, you can find it over on my Patreon page, where you can subscribe to support me, and to get access to a whole lot of other really cool materials I've made for students and teachers and just people interested in studying literature. Thanks, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.